beautiful area of Romania for those who will attend it in person. We are glad to announce that INI and CATS, the Chinese Academy for Transportation Sciences of the Ministry of Transport of China, with the support of other co-organizers from Eurasia.
This is a workshop from Bison Project, and we are going to discuss about recommendations towards the integration of the European strategy on green infrastructure into the national policy and legislation system of the EU member states regarding transport infrastructure development. So the plan is to present you what we are doing in Bison regarding this issue, some research and some surveys that we have already realized, which were the results, and some of our preliminary recommendations, and we hope that we get your feedback regarding further recommendations or ranking the recommendations that we have already been proposing based, of course, on your background and your knowledge on the aspects. Some words regarding Bison. I don't know if you are all familiar with the project. We have seen that there is a need for a common European knowledge, so there is a relevant change for a better mainstreaming of transport and biodiversity. We want to do this across all modes and take into account the various needs from Western and Eastern countries. So it's a European project with really many countries involved and too many people that are working together on mapping biodiversity and transport domains. So regarding mapping of the and mainstreaming of green and grey infrastructure, we wanted to see, first of all, what is the status of the national policy, legislation, and implementation tools and recommendations for the integration of the European SGI into their transport infrastructure development. So all this task was divided into different pillars. First of all, we wanted to assess the alignment of national transport policies with the European SGI and biodiversity strategy, and on the same time, we wanted to see what is the alignment of the national legislation with the European policies and strategies. So we had to see the alignment status, what are the gaps for the policies and the legislation, and we also had some initial recommendations. How did we achieve this? We had run through different surveys, one big one from the Bison project that was related also to other things, apart from the specific one that is related to policies and legislative alignment. The big questionnaire was among 15 countries, and we had more than 100 responders in total. But some needs emerged from this first questionnaire, and we wanted to cover these needs, the specific needs, from a second questionnaire that was more, focused on the needs of the alignment of the policies and legislation, the national policies and legislation. And what were our results? I think that you will be very interested in what we got. Almost 40% of the countries that participated in our survey has integrated biodiversity-related topics into their national transport policies and strategies. Unfortunately, though, the majority, the 60%, has either not integrated this type of issues in their national transport policies, or the responders didn't know if they are doing it or not. From the country, and we have also very good reasons why they have not done it yet, or they don't know. We found out there is a lack of coordination and cooperation between the transport and the biodiversity sector, that there is a lack of concern, political concern, and will and priority, And the economy still remains the main factor that rules the relevant policy decisions and not the biodiversity. And the fact that the transport sector mainly focuses at achieving its own objectives and there is no communication between the transport and the biodiversity domain in order for this to change. From the countries that have not yet aligned to these European strategies, the majority have neither launched the process towards their integration in their national transport policy and strategies towards the next 1 to 2 years. So this is an unfortunate event. Regarding now the integration of biodiversity-related topics into national strategic environmental assessment, we saw that the majority of the responders, the countries, the 78%, has a strategic environmental assessment already implemented with their national and regional master plans. And the 86% of them has also integrated the special topics of biodiversity, ecological connectivity, and green infrastructure into their strategic environmental assessments. From the second survey, the results were more or less the same. So we saw that 54% have either already adopted the EU SGI in their national transport policy or the integration is in progress. So the results were more or less the same. In a nutshell, we have 4 different status. We have countries with good integration of European policies into their national policies, like France, Germany, Ireland, Poland, and Sweden. We have also countries that have no integration, and we have some countries where the integration is in progress, and we have some countries where we didn't got actual, we don't know, we got different results from different participants. So the plan is to go more in depth with these countries to identify the status. Apart from the policies, we also wanted to see what's happening in the legislative part of the integration. So we identified some gaps in the alignment of the national legislation. For example, that the priority is given to economic consideration, as we saw also at the policy domain. That there is a discretionary power granted to authorities in charge of authorizing transport infrastructure. There is inadequate links between land use planning and infrastructure transport policies. Another problem is that the transport law is fragmented and complex. There are current trends towards the regression of environmental law. There is a judicial review which is often limited, and there are more cases against the protection of in the environment when we are talking about transport. Some potential ways of improving these gaps is to generalize the compensation of the environmental damage, take better into account the national law and the ordinary nature, adopt the SGI standards inside agencies, generalize an ecological proportionality principle, improve the quality of EIA into national law, reinforce the independence of the authorities in charge of transport infrastructure project, and work towards the goal of zero net artificialization of the territory like France does, and promote actions of renaturation of grey infrastructure. So, based on these results, we have identified some preliminary recommendations towards the alignment of the European strategies into the national policy and legislation. We have identified 5 different domains for which we want specific recommendations to be structured. The first one is the national policy level and policy and strategy documents. The second one is the national planning level. The third is the legal framework and instruments. The fourth is the regional strategies and instruments. And the fifth one is the follow-up process in national and regional level. So now I give the floor to my colleague Lazaros here. The plan is to present some preliminary recommendations for each domain separately. We will give you some spreadsheets. Do they have them already?
Yeah. We have 10.
We will give you some spreadsheets, and we will explain the procedure that we would like you to do while Lazaros is presenting the preliminary recommendations.
Can you work on this? The next?
So, welcome from my side as well. I will present the recommendation that we have already have line, let's say, during the project until now. We can say that these recommendations are a result of evaluation of the research that we have done, both with the questionnaire, but also about the legal situation. We try to merge them using concrete criteria on the topics about mainstreaming green infrastructure to the transport strategies and policies. So actually, I will present the recommendations per topic. You will create about 10 groups. We've created 10 sheets, which means that you will be about one or two persons per group, just to have a better understanding. So you can actually vote on the recommendation, or much more productively, to add any new recommendation that you believe is necessary. Okay, so let's see the theme first, which is first of all, the ratification of international conventions and agreements with concrete national action plans. I will try also to make some comments per recommendation, because this is something that we can see that a lot of countries, in theory, they are participating, they are joining international conferences or even EU, but in practice, there is no concrete action plan that can be followed just after the ratification, which is the main issue. The second is the provision of clear definition of green infrastructure. We saw that in some countries, the explanation, the definition of the green infrastructure is very diverse. In Italy, for example, it's very wide, it's very, let's say, without any detail, it's a definition, but in France, it's more concrete and more step by step. So it's very important to make a clear definition of green infrastructure, and actually to see in this definition how this can be implemented in practice. So we need to be connected in a concrete management directions that we have to give. And an example, for example, is that when we talk about green infrastructure, a lot of people, and mainly politicians, they are talking about the green roofs, which is not like that. And if you see, there is a lot of communication material that talking about green infrastructure, and what they are promoted is green roofs, gardens, urban, let's say, green infrastructure. And this is something that, for our point of view, when we talk about connectivity, about integrating green infrastructure on transport development, this is something completely different. And the third recommendation is about money, and it's about including biodiversity and green infrastructure, let's say, elements on national budgeting. On national planning level, there was a long discussion about the master plans first of all, and a big chapter that is following the master plans or the big programs or plans in the national level, which is the CEI. So the recommendations that are coming are the following. Enforce the inclusion of ecological connectivity-related targets in national master plans or similar strategic transport documents and programs and their SEAs. Include reversibility of environmental impact on infrastructure planning as key criterion of sustainability based on decision making. And this is something, especially in transport sector, is very crucial, because we saw that when we talk about environmental, ecological issues, mainly they are connected with the climate change. And this is also subject of the BISON and all our activities, how to connect and to include biodiversity and green infrastructure in these environmental, let's say, impacts. and enforce the identification of detailed mapping of green and grey infrastructure conflict points. This is connected with the famous European defragmentation map that we are trying to develop, led by Marita and Cindy. They are Cindy here, but it's very crucial on national level to adopt this idea and to have a starting point of recognizing the conflict points. Support the completion of the European defragmentation map, which is interconnected, yes, I was in a hurry, and the establishment of common methodologies, techniques, and tools on mapping corridors and crucial GI, green infrastructure, and biodiversity elements. And this is also another detail that we have discussed with Marita. It's about the scale, how low we are going on completion of the European defragmentation map. And fifth, enforce the mitigation hierarchy on selection of linear infrastructure alignment in relation with natural protected areas and ecological corridors based on quantity and quality of biodiversity data and green infrastructure elements. This is something that is very important because usually when we are going to make an alignment in a protected area, in a Natura 2000 area, in an Emerald network area, we say avoidance, go outside. But then immediately we have to start to talk about mitigation because there we have to see how we secure the coherence between the two protected areas or the connectivity for the special needs of important species or large distributed species like large carnivores, large ungulates, and so on. No, I was thinking to present all and then to have the overall view and then to go one by one to see if they have any kind of question, because I assume maybe there are overlapping questions. And one of the most demanding, let's say, topic, which is the legal situation, the legal recommendation that we have to propose, which is really quite demanding, let's say. So, about the legal framework and instruments, the recommendations are the following. Create a concrete and clear legal framework for integrate green infrastructure and biodiversity in transport and other development sectors. This is quite important debate that we have in Safe Green, because on supporting connectivity, it's not only transport sector, but also we need to see the spatial planning, all the other activities which is around of the transport alignment, because it's not only the zone of the transport, which is maybe it's the priority or the property from the owner of the road, but we have to see what is happening about the connectivity in the adjustment areas. Simplification and clarification of public construction permitting legislation and respective policy. Include biodiversity and especially priority species and habitats in environmental impact assessment studies, independently if the transport connected or with a Natura 2000 network. This is connected with a mitigation area that we mentioned before. Development of methodologies and tools to refine and the impact analysis and measuring the impacts. And this is something is related with the EIA process, for example. Give the appropriate time on the assessment of the environmental impacts to obtain both quantity and quality of evidence, information, and data as a baseline for the final decision. Avoid faster procedure on environmental assessment and evaluation of alternative solutions. This is really a very crucial point because all developers, all policymakers want to have fast decisions and fast construction. And usually they want to make an EIA having a monitoring of 1 month or 2 months or, let's say, with 3 visits in the fields. This is something that we have to see following the guidelines of the 3 phases monitoring, which means that we need to have monitoring before, during, and after construction of the transport infrastructure. And this has to be somehow legally supported not to be just a wish list, but just a concrete demand on a legal tool. Establish internal and legal regulation to address biodiversity adaptation needs on impact assessment and the consideration of the environmental and transport planning. And this can be a law, can be a ministerial decision, a regulation, or any other, it depends on the country, because all these tools can be different in different countries. Deepening or adopting transversal European legislation regulating the protection of specific elements of biodiversity, following the example of Water Framework Directive, which is an umbrella directive that can be followed in order to protect the water, let's say, quality and quantity somehow. Create a clear legal and regulatory framework with integrating green infrastructure, biodiversity, and ecological connectivity in environmental supervising of the whole life cycle of transport infrastructure. Establish a clear legal framework on environmental evaluation of transport master plans in the form of monitoring the impacts on the biodiversity according to the CEA directive. You can see also that the themes can be interacted, but here, as we talk about the legal, let's say, securing of the process, they can be interconnected. And go from the national to more local place on the regional strategies and instruments. The recommendations are related with integrating biodiversity and ecological connectivity in regional transport, the gene infrastructure biodiversity strategies plan, and plans and programs, and their SCAs. Establish criteria of social, environmental, and economical sustainability with appropriate weight value in areas with environmental interest. This is quite important. We discussed also in the previous workshop with the gap and barriers, because sometimes, for example, we are giving the same value between environmental factors like climate change and biodiversity. And this is a really big debate sometimes when we are proposing to create a tunnel, but tunnel means that we have more carbon dioxide emission, which means we will use more diesel, more energy. But in this case, the value, the weight of the value of the biodiversity has to be much, much higher than the climate change and the carbon dioxide emission. We had this case in a lot of such a case in a lot of case studies, let's say. And this is something also we discussed in Kresna, Andre, about all this valuing the weight of these factors. Establish a complete framework of environmental criteria with appropriate weight value, shall we say that? Develop and implement tools for project implementation, environmental supervision, guidelines, standards, national, regional data tools, and bases, production of updated and available open best practices, the comparability of project, and thus contribute to the merge of common understanding. And this is something that somehow Bison would like to do about practices, improving the handbook. This can be always available online just to be easily used from everybody. And finally, support the engagement of key stakeholders and the communication with the local society. And this is something that is very important to see. It's not only, we saw it in Albania, for example, also in Bulgaria. Public hearing, it's like a typical process. But we cannot be confused with a stakeholder engagement. It's a different process. When we talk about engagement, as we have developed in the strategy, the global strategy from sustainable, linear, and other transport infrastructure, is about evaluate the stakeholders in four fundamental groups: informative, consultancy, cooperative, and fundamental collaborative. Which means that there are some stakeholders that we have to work together, not just to inform them. And this is very crucial. And finally, we have to see the follow-up process in national and regional level. which means that we have to establish environmental supervising, to have established follow-up process to support the improvement of transport master plans based on evaluation of long-term monitoring data, and support the creation of and operate of permanent databases with update available information of biodiversity. And this is the point 3, is coming from the previous workshop, which is one of the best, of the first, let's say, gap and barriers that Bison is defining on the overall process. So these are our recommendations. Until now, the task 5.1 of Bison have concluded. Of course, we have more and more and more work to do, but we would like to have your feedback. And if you want, you can make your teams for 1 or 2 persons, read it. Maybe if you like, we can go back to see it one by one, and to see if, first of all, before starting to give your feedback, to see if you have any kind of questions or any kind of comment. So please have a look, take 2 minutes, 3, and you can go further, the next steps. Make your teams. And again, think about new recommendations. It's not only to say yes or not. Please, Catherine. Yes, we can turn the back side of the page. You can put the number of the theme, and under the number we can add any new recommendation we would like to do.
And in the end, we will discuss them for each domain. Your proposals, I mean.
Please. No, just vote. Just plus, you know. Just a cross. Just a cross. No. No, the number of crosses of votes will give the ranking at the end. Can you please open the discussion? Is just to hear everything.
Is on the second issue with the national planning level. The second question, the second bullet. So not this one, the next slide.
I propose to have it one by one theme. Just to not be.
Can we show to the online participants, can we make them see the presentation? Okay, because yes, we would like to go one by one domain and listen to your proposals for each one. So also the online participants can tell us if they have any proposals, yes, or identify their priorities for each domain.
Okay, so can I comment something?
Yes, please.
I mean, there are 2 different issues for us. The first one refers to the green infrastructure, independently of the transportation.
Yes, but here we have to connect them.
Okay.
Because we talk about the transport policy and transport development.
But the green infrastructure is also affected cumulatively by transportation and mining and other.
In this case, you can make your comment. But if it's about agriculture alone, it's not our, let's say, business here.
Okay.
You understand?
Yes.
If it's connected with the spatial planning, of course, this is what Safe Green is doing. This is what is, as a stakeholder, let's say, action plans we want to do it in the local, regional level. So in this case, of course.
Because the problem is that usually with the second, I mean with the transport policy, usually the main actors in the transportation says, well, mining and other stuff are not our business. We are just dealing with the transport, and that's it.
And this is true.
Yeah.
We can do something.
Okay, thank you.
Please, Anders.
Yeah. In your statement, you have a clear definition of green infrastructure. And we try to do that in Sweden, and the discussion is still ongoing, and it's been ongoing for several years. Because what is a clear definition of green infrastructure? You can try to do that in a scientific point of view, and you will end up in a mess, because for Lishans it's something, for the moose it's something quite different. So for me, I think green infrastructure should be considered more as a political statement. What do we mean? It's not usable to have it in a scientific point of view, in this sense, when you discuss it in a political document. It should be something that you intend, giving a meaning of what you mean, connection in a way. In Sweden, we ended up in trying to do that in a scientific way, and the universities start to discuss it, and this discussion will never end, I think.
But this is a problem, because it's an open discussion, so many years, and everybody gives the explanation that he believes that has to be. But this is the reason that we have a kind of confusion. And maybe here it's more clear, because the green infrastructure has to be connected with ecological connectivity. It's more easy. And this is something that we have discussed also in Harbon project with Radu, that we can't do that. We are not connected with the green roofs. Here is something very crucial. And maybe green infrastructure can be, for example, connected with a natural-based solution related with the transport. And for that, we are talking about concrete management directions. This is the point, because this can be wide, or you can start to have a wide, let's say, definition. But to go in practice, we have to see how to implement this term, this concept. And if you have any kind of process and result in Sweden, please share that. We need case studies. But this show how much confused term is. Please. Yes, please.
Just to follow up on that, I mean, when you were discussing this a couple of minutes ago, you mentioned the case of Italy, that the definition is very broad, etc. So are you trying to say that a clear definition, one definition is needed for all the countries, or each country should be able to define what they understand by green infrastructure? What exactly is this?
For me, it has to be in the European level.
Okay, in that case, that's what came to my mind, that if at all we want a clear definition, it has to come from the EU. Yeah. Then why should it be under the national policy level then? That's the question. You understand? That's because indeed,
yes,
a definition
very
for
good
it
comment.
To be accepted.
Very good comment.
Yeah, I mean, it's exactly.
Very good comment. Actually, it had to be defined in the European level and to be just translated in the national level.
Exactly.
So this is.
Yeah, that's the easiest way to.
Yeah. True. This is the point. Thank you. So, can we say that we were close to close the theme 1? Or we have another question? Because this looks to be short. If we're going to the next, it will be a little bit longer. So please, can I have your permit to go to the next thing? Thank you very much. So national planning. Read again, ask again, comment again. And also one comment of my side. Helen presented the results of the questionnaire, but this only concrete number of countries. Estimate all the other countries, and if you are coming for a country that is not participated, is not, let's say, part of the questionnaire distributed, then you can add your comment, because in your countries, it's something different. This is much more important. Because this is a new point, let's say. We found a publication about origin sustainability on transport development. Usually, thank you for the question and the need to clarify it. This publication says that when we origin sustainability in general, we use 3 pillars. Social impacts, we have to estimate social impacts, impacts on economic impacts, and environmental. But this says that we have to see also the reversibility of impact. We will do something in the environment. How much reversibles are these impacts? And on transport sector, this is crucial. We all know that if a road is constructed, nothing would be similar with the previous. Nothing will be same. So it will be not totally reversible. This is crucial. And for me, this is one of the most important things that we have to highlight. And for that, we are going on mitigation. It's very difficult to talk about avoidance when we construct a road. We are doing the best, let's say, mitigation measures, overpasses, underpasses, but will not be 100% as it was. We are going to maximize our effort or to minimize the impacts. And this is, for all the people that is working in the transport sector, has to be the reality. They have to realize that this is the truth. There's no perfect situation. We are going just to do our best. And this has to be under, let's say, consideration. We have to take it into account. Please, Anders.
Yeah, I must ask a question about the reversibility. When we have a national plan in Sweden, the discussion is should we build a high-speed railway or not? And reversibility in that case is, for me, quite irrelevant in the discussion. But when we discuss the alignment of this high-speed, then it's more accurate. Yes. So I don't know if it should be in the national level planning, or perhaps there are other examples where it fit in. I don't know.
It depends how you translate it in the reality. But in any case, the point is to take the decision having in mind that this will be reversible or not. And for me, it's very important to say that I will do the road without being sustainable. Because here, we saw it in all, let's say, cases. Everybody now, all the plants are sustainable. And you have to see how much sustainable they are. We saw it again in Albania. There is always mentioning mitigation hierarchy, sustainable principles. But in practice, nobody realized that. You first of all, to realize the level of reversibility, and then to admit it, to say, okay, I'm going to maximize or to minimize the impacts. Let's reverse it. But please, if you have any kind of new or a different expression that you believe it's better understandable, this is why we are here.
I would suggest to maybe write it exactly as you said now. So not to say include reversibility, because like we didn't understand you, other people will not understand you. Just to maybe write, I mean, I think for infrastructure construction and operation, I think we can agree that it's irreversible. So maybe you could write irreversibility, admit.
No. We can use the expression we have in the declaration of the conference, make the transport less reversible, the impacts less reversible, I think, or something like that. I don't remember exactly. You remember, we discussed this also in the declaration.
For the wording, you can...
Okay, this is a good point.
And I would have another point, and that's the last one, the 5th. And that's again what Anders said before about the reversibility. Are you talking here about the SEA or the EIA? Because the mitigation hierarchy, I mean, for the SEA, I think you only use the first part of the, at least we do in Austria, the avoidance and maybe the mitigation, but you don't go further down. It's too detailed.
Yes, we can measure it in the SEA. You say, I'm changing the alignments, but mitigation needed, that's all. In the SEA, we will not go with the details to say what kind of mitigation measures you need, but in the SEA, we say, we are changing the alignment, we are avoiding the protected areas, but here, we highlight it as a conflict point.
And for me, one question that we are dealing with at the moment in Austria, because we are revising our guidelines on SEA, is it really only the protected areas and the ecological corridors, or do I have to look further, like important habitats that are not protected? I'm not sure about the answer, it's just a discussion point, because I don't know if on strategic level I can comply to really go further than the protected areas.
This is really important, nice question, because we see it also in the Bern Convention. There is a special recommendation of important natural areas outside of Emerald Network. And again, maybe a good example is the high-value natural areas, which is connected with agriculture, more or less. When we have, for example, important species in agricultural areas, they are not protected areas, but the presence of these species are increase the value of the area. Or maybe we have game reserves, or other kind of, let's say, important natural area. Let's avoid to say other protected areas. But yes, it can be, the list of these areas, the categories can be quite long. Or monument, let's say, of natural. There are a lot of other similar cases.
Lazaros, may I answer to that remark
of course.
Of Elke?
This is the reason you are here.
I would be very pleased to put valuable habitats and biotopes in the map and integrate in our analysis of the conflict points, but it's not the only case where data are missing, so it's directly linked to number 6. So yeah, I made here a dig plus for a creation and operating of proper databases with these data are still missing, but we need them beside the protected areas.
Good. In Greece, for example, we have the game reserves, the wildlife, let's say, refuges. And I believe that this has to be outside of Natura, just about that, because they are important areas. Nobody gives so much interest that they have to have. But talking about connectivity, they can work as a stepping stone systems. They have not the value of the protection as the Natura 2000 or a national park, but in their character, they can play the role of connectivity. Such cases are, of course, very, very, very important. Please, I saw several hands up.
Andrei Kovacev from BBF, Bulgaria. I think in point 3, probably it's important to distinguish the conflict points on existing infrastructure and future infrastructure, because they need different planning. Obviously, existing infrastructure needs some plan for future defragmentation of it, and also probably prioritization, clear prioritization from where to start. But, for example, future needs just clear requirements how to, during the new process of construction, to provide it. So probably they should be just, clearly explained as part of the
Thank you for the
process.
comment. Yeah. In Harmon, we have the future and existing transport infrastructure with different colors. Which is, this is, I mean, it was too much detail to include it, but at least for the Harmon, how we use it, there was a different coloring of existing and future infrastructure. Who else? Anders? Or?
I wanted to support Elke about the protected areas. In Sweden, we don't have much protected areas, so we need to use other wordings. And perhaps you could say, as we do in Sweden, areas of high value or importance to biodiversity, for example, protected areas, something like that.
Good. Again, I think in Connect Green, we used some, for example, the core areas of important species as well, like large carnivores. This was also very basic because based on the distribution of large carnivores, in the Carpathians, the ecological corridors was developed. So this is independently of the, not independently, related, but not based only on the Natura 2000 areas. Because the large carnivores in Carpathians have really emblematic role on, especially related with the connectivity. And please.
It's a general remark, and if I see the EU strategy on green infrastructure, it's on the one hand the biodiversity, but also the ecosystem services. Mm-hmm. I know it's a more economic translation of the value of biodiversity, but maybe it's important to include that language as well.
Thank you.
It's also a remark from the online participants.
Mm-hmm. This is connected with the definition of green infrastructure, because if you see the green infrastructure policy, there is a reference on the natural capital and then ecosystem services. In this level of discussion, we evaluate that it's too much detail to go to refer about to mention natural capital and ecosystem services, because it is on the general definition included. But it's very good to highlight it, probably. And Marius.
On the mitigation heresy, there is prevention and avoidance. And there is a difference between them. Prevention means no impact. Avoidance means no significant impact.
Oh, it's a big debate now. Karma is continued in the glossary to make a clarification about the mitigation hierarchy, because Whoa.
Can I give an example?
Of course.
If you
and then we can make a workshop about clarifications on mitigation hierarchy.
Please invite me. Outside it's raining, so if you want to prevent to get wet, stay inside. That means no impact. If you don't want to be significantly wet, take an umbrella. That is avoidance. So it's a difference. Anyway, and I was just wondering, what is defragmentation? It's a mitigation measure, right?
Of course.
Should it be in the SEA?
Well,
strategic environmental assessment?
It should be, of course.
Of course. So we should include all the measures in the SEA. Of course.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And it depends on, yeah.
If you want.
Please, Chalkia.
Excuse me, in our daily practice, mitigation is not the last we are doing. So if we mitigate, which is the green bridge over the road, which we include in the strategic plan, also because it's a factor for the costs. So we have to know if for one alignment we need 3 green bridges and for the other 15 or whatever. But in the EIA, then we go further and say for habitat loss and other impacts, I do habitat restoration, improvement, whatever. But that we don't look at into detail in the strategical level. And after that, we can also have a differentiation in Austria. If we can't restore the habitats we destroy, we can also do something similar necessary. So, but that we don't discuss at the strategic level. That's what I meant before.
Yeah, yes, but maybe this is more connected with compensation, which is another issue. I mean, in CIA, you are not going to describe the mitigation measures. Yes, but this is a hotspot. Yes, and the next was the legal level is very demanding as well. So, can we go, please? And a comment. You see how much difficult it is in one phrase to describe everything. So it will be very much appreciated if you have concrete phrases to describe of what you would like to say. Because we will try to make a resume, we will try to rephrase the sentences, but if we saw something concrete, can be more representative, it will be much more helpful. So please try to sign down and write down a phrase, concrete phrase, as you believe that can be described better the recommendation. Or put a bullet on the existing recommendation. So, let's go to see what Lowers wants to see on green infrastructure and transport development. And may I ask if somebody is a lawyer or is connected with the law procedures in her, let's say, activities? Probably no. Please, Andrei.
Just to say that the text is too good, so it's difficult to add something. But for example, first point, It's absolutely strong, and I have some details on it, but probably these are details. Based on our experience in Bulgaria of missing legislation, for example, such type like green infrastructure is not part of our official cadastre. If it is not part of cadastre, as for example separate layer or something like that, engineers cannot work with that. Planning workers also cannot work with that. Other thing, there is consequent building control generally in Bulgaria, but issues, all requirements which are given by environmental consent, they're not part of this building control. I don't know how it's in the other countries, but if it is not part of the building control, how will have any control? Of course, environmental authorities have no capacity to control all buildings, all new projects. So one other issue, we have no national standards, engineering standards for such green infrastructure. If you can know engineering standards, how to control that after that they're implemented and they're at least following some minimum level of quality. Yeah, so I don't know, these are details, but I don't know how important are they. And by the way, it's an interesting question about environmental easements. We had a case on Struma motorway where it's our project area. It was 2000 year when EA consent was given to the project. And there were mitigation measures which were outside the road easement, which is there is such text in our law for transportation and for regional development that about building easements. So the roads have building easement, and the road authorities can act in this easement and to make some things. Outside of this easement, they have no right. And the road authorities said, okay, we ask from us to manage the territory around this overpass, but we have no right to do that because it's outside of our easement. So obviously we need certain environmental easements to be included in the law in order to be able to also to manage even the more wider area in some manner which is important in order to, for example, there were prescriptions in the report that there should be no new lightnings, new build-up projects in certain distance from the facility, etc. And it was not possible to impose this in the decision, just because we had no necessary laws for that. Yeah, thank you.
May I conclude that or squeeze that in a case of find a legal instrument related with the spatial design, spatial planning? Because all this, the framework that we have described, I think can be summarized that including green infrastructure and ecological connectivity on spatial planning, with a legal, let's say, instrument, with a legal, to be legally secured somehow. And again, this is the safe green objective, how this can be secured on a legal basis. Thank you, Andre. This is a very good point. Cindy, please.
I was given the microphone for a very brief intervention.
Yes.
I would suggest, based on our experience in other areas of environmental management, to include the term legally binding into the legal part. Clear, can I have this for a moment? Clear, concrete, that's very good. But to have something really implemented and included into the functioning system of the governance of the country, included in the budget, you need it to be legally binding. And unless we have the green infrastructure and ecological corridors introduced as terms in certain legal instruments, which will make them legally binding, we cannot certainly secure funding for their implementation, for their support. And then we'll be going around in a circle. This is the situation in Bulgaria. We may produce one after another recommendation and strategic document unless we improve legislation with concrete and specific, legally binding.
But I think,
shall I say, inclusions into certain existing laws or bylaws. I'm not very certain which would be the best way.
yes.
But this is how we've been working with, even after clear recommendations from EU. It can be a very difficult and long process on national level to introduce certain terms in the national legislation. So this is briefly my intervention. Thank you.
Thank you, Emma. I mean, just to remind that budgeting is one of the first recommendations in the policy level, which means, of course, they can be connected with a legal framework, and we have, of course, to add something here. Do we have more time, Helen? Okay. Do we have any questions from the online participants? Okay. So this means that we have a little bit more time. Please, Cindy.
One short remark to point number 3. I would recommend not to mention the priority species in content of the Natura 2000 network, because it's just a part of biodiversity, and we have to avoid to focus just on these annex species and habitats. So I would prefer to call it like, or write it down like species guilds or species groups, and avoid the priority species.
Thank you. This was again based on the large carnivores from Carpathian experience, so we try to translate it in more general, let's say, view. Thank you. And also this is connected to what Chalkia says about other important natural areas. So this is more or less interconnected. Please, Chalkia.
I have a very special remark. For me, this is, I don't know if it's easy to understand to have the legal framework and the instruments in one kind of chapter. I suggest to separate it, to have the legal part that really has to be written down in legally binding laws. But other things like the development of methodologies and tools to define the impact analysis and measuring the impacts, I think that's nothing that has to go into a law that's more a technical standard or a guideline. So I don't know if we shouldn't try to separate the legal part and the...
When we talk about instruments, we talk about legal instruments, like ministerial decisions. It's not a law, but it's part of the legal framework.
Yes, but the methodologies you think is a legal...
No, just to be, how it says...
For me, that's more the technical part.
Yes, but we need to include the methodologies in such a kind of instrument. I mean, we need a special regulation of including the master plans, the ecological connectivity. If there's no law with a decision or a regulation of the Ministry of Transportation or a common ministerial decision, it will not be a law, but this is somehow, it works in many countries, at least in Greece.
Yeah, maybe it's different in
So
Austria.
maybe
And I have a second... It's okay.
Okay.
Leave it. It was just
no,
a
it's
suggestion.
It's important because probably the title of the theme 3 can be changed. It's clear. It's important for me because if the title is not understandable, if we mean that the instruments are not legal, then we have to reshape the title of the theme, or just to add laws and legal instruments. It's a point of English. Maybe this is a Greek point of thought.
Maybe it's also a point of how different countries deal with it, and probably we deal in a different way than you do. Because for us, the technical things are not...
we are not talking the technical tools. We are talking here how to support the legal implementation of the technical tools. And maybe
yes.
I'm thinking just to complete, maybe we have to say that this is laws and other legal instruments. I don't know if it's better English description.
But the development of methodologies, the point 4, that's for me something technical.
Yes, but to be used, to make people obliged to use it, we can have we need to have such an instrument, legal instrument, to have it legally binded. Maybe we have to arrange somehow the bullets. This can be bullet.
The order, yes, maybe.
Yeah.
And I have another question.
That's a good point.
I'm sorry, I don't understand point 2. What does that mean? Me neither. Simplification and clarification of public construction permitting legislation and respective policy.
This is how we are giving permission to construct a road. Maybe. Nikki says that maybe we miss the transportation between public construction, which means the whole phrase could be a simplification and clarification of public transportation construction, permitting legislation and perspective policy. But we have to see it. I think this came from the legal research and not for our part. So maybe we have to discuss with the colleagues. Yes, maybe. Anyway, put not 3 question marks.
Just two comments on the third issue, include biodiversity. It's already included. I mean, what I want to say is that these species are protected inside and outside Natura 2000. And there is clear reference in the legislation and in the EU guidelines that we need to consider them in the assessments. For instance, if you build a road and you have to demolish a building and you have a bat species roosting in the building, it is protected. I mean, it's not allowed to destroy the roost without, of course, asking for what it's called derogation. Oh. So I would say the third point, I would not see it as necessary because it's already covered in EU legislation and probably in all the EU state members' legislation. And the other one that I wanted to comment is that with the deepening, 7, deepening or adopting transversal European legislation regulating the protection of specific elements of biodiversity. One that read this will say, well, specific elements is Natura 2000. So we do have European legislation for specific elements, Natura 2000, which is quite similar with Water Framework Directive. But we feel that basically at the European level, we only protect pieces of nature. So we want to have a network, not pieces. Because indeed, the Water Framework Directive does deal with a network. Natura 2000 only with scraps, not a network. Yeah, I add some comments on the... Thank you.
Good, thank you. I think we have to move and to put question marks here also to discuss in the second level. So, Anders, please. Can be please the last question on this thing? Thank you. You are very kind.
Perhaps, but
perhaps
I start to wonder who is the receiver of this document. Is it politicians, or is it the head of an agency, or is it like me, just a...
The EU. All Bison delivers will be proposals. The Bison think that Bison is a proposal that is it's a project that will prepare new research activities. So,
but I think
it's fundamental somehow what we recommend.
I think it could be reorganized to hit. So if it does, I don't know, politicians in European Union, he should know what to read. He don't read all this, and he'd understand maybe 1/10. Is it one working in DG? He would get help to know what he should read. I don't know, but for me, it's a mix-up of who is the receiver in this.
Yes. As far as I understand, you mean that we have to reshape all recommendations according to the EU language, because they have their own, let's say, way of writing, their own ways of expressing the thoughts. Yes, of course, because this is the rough text that we are preparing day by day. That's a good point. Yes,
who is
what
addressed?
We understand it's not easy or, I'd say, secure that everybody can read in the same way.
Yes, I think it should be kept as simple as possible.
Okay.
And maybe if that's kind of the recommendation going to the EU, then several things are, well, they can only recommend that to the member states because it's the homework of the member states to do so.
I think we've done this discussion because sometimes we believe that, okay, this is included, but we include it just to highlight it. We assume that it is done, but actually it's ignored. So sometimes we include it just to highlight it.
No, I think it's good and it's important from the content side, but it's hard to understand it, I think.
Okay.
That's the only thing.
Thank you.
The recommendations should be kept as simple as possible, but they should accompany by a text, one paragraph that explains in detail exactly what this recommendation is about.
Yes, definitely will be supportive, let's say, material. So can we move on? So here we are going to the regional level. Please have 4.5 minutes. 2 minutes? Wow.
Just in order to support you, Lazaros, to be very fast, I love all of them, but the question is why regional? I mean,
We don't have regional.
for transportation, at least we don't have in Romania this regional level. We do have regions, but not preoccupations for transportation and for biodiversity. Well, so they can work as well at the national level.
Can be also municipality level. So it depends on the countries, but the point is how to go from the national level to the local level. This is the main point. If it's regional or not, it's another point of view. But you have to have in mind that there are countries which are federal structure like Austria, like Germany, that this is crucial because we have a national law and a county is never implemented because they have their own counties.
I know, I understand.
In Greece, we have regional, let's say, strategies. We have to have. So it's depends on the national, let's say, system, how the country is structured. But in any case, see this as a local implementation. How we are going to implement it in practice.
I do understand, but just not to remain only as proposals for regional, because, I mean, should be applied also for countries which are not so regional organized.
Or just to add regional and local strategies, local and regional strategies. This is good points. Because also here we are going on the EIA level. We are not going deeply, but just on the first level of EIA, and to see how the SEA will be implemented in the local level. For example, see the point 6, a moment. Any kind of engagement of local stakeholders can be this level. You can talk about that in the strategic level. Please.
Yeah, we discussed it first internally, but I think it's important to calculate not the impact of one project, the ecological impact of one project. Maybe it's better to give an example, like if you give a permit to a company to have a water. Groundwater access, and this existing impact or impact assessments. But for one project, they always say like, okay, the impact is very little. But of course, if you have the accumulation of different the different projects, then the impact can be, of course, much bigger. But that's never calculated.
This is something that I saw it personally, but if you see the law, both of SEA and EIA, they are include both the estimation of cumulative impacts. So it's not necessary to ask something that already exists. It is also something that can be highlighted, but is as a demand, as a legal demand, it's clearly written down. Maybe we have to highlight it.
Yeah, I don't know if it's in our country. It's the case that
it's not about the country. It's about the EU directive.
Yes. Yeah,
they are both included.
Of course, it needs to be translated in
because
national policies.
We faced that because when we recommend proposals in the local level, we just mentioned that, and the concrete articles of measuring of cumulative, let's say, effect. And this is especially not for roads, but for wind farms. It's a typical demand. Because wind farms is a typical, and the same company is, let's say, submitted in one mountain mass 10 different projects, which actually is a one investment.
Yes, yeah, it's a good example.
This is a typical case of, I would say, salamizing the big projects. And on the other hand, all SCAs for master plans has this role to assess the cumulative impact in the whole area from the total let's say, amount of infrastructure.
Yeah.
Yes, if we don't have any other question, can you go to the last? You have to stop. Please, if you wrote down, it will be welcome. In the closing session, continue your brainstorming. And if you agree, it's okay, just ticked. Okay. Yeah.
So this is why we wanted to consent for the personal data to be able to communicate after the conference.
And have in mind also that this is a basic step for developing the documentation, but we have to take into account also other elements, like, for example, the declaration of the conference. We have also the declaration of safe green projects. There are also other, let's say, feedback that we have to take into account for the final, let's say, creation of the framework of the recommendations. In any case, it's time to say thank you very much. It was really nice to have this feedback. We hope that as the last event of the conference, we hope that we have good and productive days here and enjoyable. And thank you very much.